In November 1923, Adolf Hitler tried to seize power in a beer hall. It failed in less than a day. He was arrested. His party was banned. Most of the men who followed him scattered. By that measure, the Nazi movement should have died right there. A failed coup, a jailed leader, a banned party with maybe 50,000 members in a country of 60 million. So here's the question nobody answers well. How does a movement that collapses in 1923 end up running the entire country by 1933? The textbook version says one word: depression. Hyperinflation wrecked Germany, the depression finished the job, and desperate people turned to an extremist. Clean story. Wrong story. Or at least, badly incomplete. Let's actually walk through what happened. Start with the failed coup. Hitler didn't vanish after it. He went on trial for treason, and the trial made him famous. He used the courtroom as a stage, gave speeches to the press instead of a defense, and turned a humiliating defeat into national exposure. He got 5 years. He served about 9 months. That's not accountability. That's a warning sign historians often skip past too quickly. While he was in prison, he wrote Mein Kampf. Most people know that part. Fewer people know what he did with the time after release. He didn't rebuild the old strategy. The old strategy was a putsch, an armed uprising, seize the state by force. That had just failed. So he changed the plan entirely. From here on, the party would take power through elections, through the ballot box, legally. That decision is the hinge the whole story turns on, and it rarely gets the weight it deserves. For the next few years, from about 1924 to 1929, the Nazi Party was a fringe group. Genuinely fringe. In the 1928 national election, they won under 3% of the vote. 3%. If you stop the story there, nobody would believe what came next. Germany in those years was actually stabilizing. A new currency ended the hyperinflation. American loans propped up the economy. Culture was booming in Berlin. This is the part the simple version leaves out entirely. The Nazis were failing during the good years. Extremism doesn't sell when things are working. Then in 1929, the American stock market collapsed, and because Germany's recovery was built on American loans, that collapse hit Germany like a second earthquake. Banks called in loans. Unemployment exploded. By 1932, roughly 6 million Germans were out of work. Now the crisis part of the story is true. It's just not the whole story, and it's not even the most important part. 1. Here's what actually mattered more. The German political system itself was already broken before the crisis arrived. The Weimar Republic's constitution used a proportional voting system that let dozens of small parties into parliament. Coalition governments formed and collapsed constantly. Between 1930 and 1933 alone, Germany had multiple chancellors and several snap elections. Voters watched their government fail to govern over and over, years before Hitler was ever close to power. That instability is structural, not emotional, and it's the piece most retellings compress into a single sentence. Now add the economic pain to a system already proving it couldn't function. The Nazi Party's vote share didn't creep up. It exploded. From under 3% in 1928 to over 18% in 1930. Then over 37% in July 1932, making them the largest party in parliament. Still not a majority. Never a majority, actually, in a free election. And this is where most explanations quietly go wrong. Hitler did not win a majority and simply take charge. What happened instead was a backroom deal. By late 1932, the Nazi vote had actually started slipping. Conservative politicians and industrialists around President Hindenburg looked at the situation and made a calculation. They believed they could use Hitler, bring him into government as chancellor, surround him with conservative ministers, control him, use his mass movement to crush the political left, and discard him once he'd served his purpose. That is almost the exact plan, and it is one of the great miscalculations in modern history. On January 30th, 1933, Hindenburg appointed Hitler chancellor. Not because the Nazis had won outright, but because a small circle of establishment power brokers thought they could manage him from the inside. Historians call this backstage intrigue, and it deserves far more attention than it gets, because it means the Nazi rise wasn't purely a story of mass persuasion. It was also a story of elite miscalculation.
The establishment placed their bet, unaware of the groundswell rising against them.
Once he had the chancellorship, the legal path continued. A fire in the Reichstag building gave the government a pretext to suspend civil liberties. It happened on the night of February 27, 1933, less than a month after Hitler took office. A young Dutch council communist was caught inside and confessed. The Nazis said it was the opening shot of a communist uprising. Most historians today doubt that claim. But the truth of the fire mattered less than what it made possible. Within a day, Hindenburg signed a decree suspending freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to assembly. Police could search homes without a warrant. Political opponents could be arrested and held without trial. This wasn't hidden. It was published as law. And it happened before a single vote in the next election was even cast. That election came in March. Even with the head start, even with communist newspapers shut down and opposition rallies broken up by police and paramilitaries, the Nazis still didn't win a majority on their own. They took under 4%. They needed a coalition partner just to get past 50. So they turned to the Enabling Act. On paper, this was simple. A law that let Hitler's cabinet pass legislation without the Reichstag's approval and without the president's signature. No debate. No vote in parliament for each new law. In practice, it was the moment German democracy handed over its own machinery. Passing it required a 2/3 majority, and that's worth pausing on, because it means the Nazis needed help. Communist deputies had already been arrested or driven underground, their seats effectively erased. Paramilitary troops surrounded the vote itself, lining the hall where the vote happened. And the Catholic Centre Party, the deciding bloc, was persuaded to vote yes after receiving assurances about religious protections that were never honored. The final count was 404-4 in favor, 9-4 against. Every no vote came from the Social Democrats, the last party in the room willing to say no out loud. With that vote, the legal transformation of Germany accelerated fast. Within weeks, state governments across the country were dissolved and replaced with Nazi-appointed officials. By May, trade unions were banned outright, their offices raided in a single coordinated morning. By July, every political party except the Nazi Party itself was outlawed. Germany was now, by law, a one-party state, and all of it had been built on paperwork, decrees, and a parliamentary vote. Not a single tank had to move. There's one more piece historians treat as a footnote that deserves more than that. In June and July of 1934, Hitler turned on his own movement. The Sturm of Teeling, the brown shirt paramilitary that had done so much of the street violence to get him this far, had grown into a rival power center, and its leader, Ernst Röhm, wanted the SA folded into the regular army with himself in command. That threatened the generals Hitler still needed on his side. So over a single weekend, Hitler had Röhm and dozens of other SA leaders arrested and executed without trial. It's remembered as the Night of the Long Knives, and its significance goes beyond the killing itself. It proved that even the men who built Hitler's movement from the street up were disposable the moment they became inconvenient. If a founding lieutenant wasn't safe, no one below him was either. A month after that, Hindenburg died. And here the last legal box got checked. Instead of holding a new presidential election, Hitler's cabinet simply merged the presidency into the chancellorship. Hitler became head of state and head of government at once, and the army was made to swear a personal oath of loyalty to him by name, not to the constitution, not to the office. That single line in that single oath tells you how completely the state had already been rebuilt around one man. So circle back to what people get wrong. They get wrong that this was inevitable. Some straight line from a failed 1923 putsch to total power in 1933. It wasn't a straight line. It was a movement that nearly died, spent years as an irrelevant fringe party, and only broke through because three separate things lined up at once. A voting system that couldn't produce stable government. An economic collapse that discredited every other option on the ballot. And a small group of powerful men who thought they were clever enough to use an extremist and then dispose of him. That threatened the generals Hitler still needed on his side. So over a single weekend, Hitler had Röhm and dozens of other SA leaders arrested and executed without trial. It's remembered as the Night of the Long Knives, and its significance goes beyond the killing itself. It proved that even the men who built Hitler's movement from the street up were disposable the moment they became inconvenient. If a founding lieutenant wasn't safe, no one below him was either. A month after that, Hindenburg died. And here the last legal box got checked. Instead of holding a new presidential election, Hitler's cabinet simply merged the presidency into the chancellorship. Hitler became head of state and head of government at once, and the army was made to swear a personal oath of loyalty to him by name, not to the constitution, not to the office. That single line in that single oath tells you how completely the state had already been rebuilt around one man. So circle back to what people get wrong. They get wrong that this was inevitable. Some straight line from a failed 1923 putsch to total power in 1933. It wasn't a straight line. It was a movement that nearly died, spent years as an irrelevant fringe party, and only broke through because three separate things lined up at once. A voting system that couldn't produce stable government. an economic collapse that discredited every other option on the ballot, and a small group of powerful men who thought they were clever enough to use an extremist and then dispose of him.